Hello, and in this video I am going to show you how I set up a sliding float rig for using either live bait or for using a dead bait. And this is great, especially in the Canaries. I use this a lot. You can live bait a small bogger or a small bream, or you can float out a sardine or a mackerel. And I'm going to show you how I set this up. Now, first things first, before I go through the stuff, it's always best to have a spool of either braid or mono that has not got a leader tied to it, because you're going to have a sliding knot on this line that you want to be able to slide up and down to adjust your depths depending on where you fish. If you've got a leader and then it's tied to your main line, you're going to have a knot in the way that will stop this float moving up and down your line. Now, there are places that you might want to have it 7-8 meters deep. So you want to have straight line through, and I will show you how I do that in a second. But first of all, here's what we're going to use. I've got a inline float. This one is a Cali float, 20 grams. So to counterbalance that with a small bait, I've got a 20 gram barrel weight. You can get bullet weights, anything to counterbalance this float. If you're going to use a quite heavy bait, then obviously if 20 gram float, go down to 15 gram and then just play around, see which one works to cock this float at the right depth in the water. You don't want it so it's completely neutralized with the weight. If I put 20 gram with a 20 gram weight on that and a biggish bait, this could be sort of under the water floating around and I won't see it at distance. So I want this at the top, like that, at the line, when my bait and weight is all on it. So we've got the float, we've got the inline weight, we've got 3 beads here. Now these beads are basically acting as intermediaries between the large hole in the float and the float stops that I will tie onto the line. The holes on these are a lot smaller, so they stop things going through the holes, whereas the hole on the float is massive, but the bead will not go through it. So that's why the bead is there, to stop the stop knot going through it. If you just put a stop knot, it'll end up going through the float will end up coming all the way up the line and your bait will be on the bottom. And then I also put 2 beads either side of the weight, and I'll show you why when we start doing the rig. The last thing, right at the bottom, I've got a swivel with a clip. Now this is where I will clip my hook lengths on, and we will go through the hook lengths, which I have here, once we've built the rig. Right, so here we go. Here is the main line. This is the main line that will be coming off your reel. It would have been threaded through the guides on your rod, and you're now ready to set up your float rig to float out baits for big fish. So the first thing you want to thread on is one of the red beads. So we're going to thread the red bead onto this line, like so. We're then going to thread the float on. Thread that all the way on, like so. Then I'm going to go bead, weight, and then bead, like so. And the last thing to do is to tie on your swivel and the clip. So we're going to use a uni knot on this 4-turn because of the thickness of the line. There we go, just damp that. Right, so there are your components on the line. Now we've got 2 more things to do on this. Well, 2 more of the same things to do on this. We're going to put 2 stop knots. So I've got power gum. You can get stop knots that are already on tubes. but you can't add them afterwards. You have to do that whilst you build your rig. Whereas power gun, you can tie a stop knot whilst you're fishing. After you've built the rig, the next day, these can just be added and carefully cut off. So I'm going to cut a length of this. I always find about 4 or 5 inches, and then you can just cut the rest off. So the first stop knot I'm going to do is above the bead that's above the weight. So I hold the power gun in line with your main line. I then loop the power gun round, create a loop like so, and then I just wrap that tag end around the main line and the power gun that's held parallel with it, and we go through it 4 or 5 times. Like so, and we pull that tight. There we go. Now I can move this down, and I'm going to trim the tag ends off on that. Now the reason I put a stop knot above that bead is to stop this weight coming right up your line when you're casting. If you cast this rig out and this weight starts travelling back up the line as the rig's going away from you, you're then basically hampering your cast. This is going to weigh down the line. It's going to make your float rig fall short. So I like to just hold that in place just with a stop knot there, so it's held against that swivel. It also stops this clattering about and damaging the knot. And that's why I put a bead between it there, just to stop this lead, which can get a little bit sharp at times, stops that damaging that knot above the swivel. So that's held in place there with a stop knot. Then the last thing to do is to do the same again. We take off 4 or 5 inches, and what we do, we tie on a stop knot above the float and above the bead that's above the float. So again, we hold the power gun parallel with the line, make a loop, and then just wrap the power gun between the loop, which encapsulates the main line. Then we pull it tight, and there we go. Now this one I'm going to leave a little bit longer. I'll leave tag ends on this at about 10 mil, like so. So let's tidy that up. There you have your sliding float rig. That float, when it lands in the water, the weight will pull down in the water, the float will stop at that sliding stop knot. You can then, if you want, test it out, move it up a bit further, and then the next time you cast out, it will go deeper. But this rig is not much caught unless it's got a hook on it. This is where my hook lengths come into play. So here we'll start with this one, 40 pound. So I've got these 40 pound hook lengths, 2 in a bag. Let's see if I can unwrap one. And they are approximately a metre, between a metre and 1 metre 20 long. What I've got here at the top on this one is a perfection loop. There's the link to tying a perfection loop. Got a perfection loop there at the top. This is in 40 pound fluorocarbon, and then I've got a 4.0 circle hook. Now what I would do very easily, just open up the clip, put the loop in the clip, and make sure that is tight. Now 40 pound fluoro, only really good for bonito. If you want to fish in the Canaries over the winter months, daytime, you've got a good chance of a bonito tuna. They should be all right on 40 pound fluoro, but unfortunately, if you do get a bluefish take or anything else, you're probably going to lose your hook. The only thing is, most of the takes in the day in the winter would be bonito. The only saving grace you've got is a circle hook, which if you don't strike and you just tighten down, you could, if you're lucky, pull into the corner of a bluefish's mouth and land it. But this gives the best bait presentation because it's light line. You haven't got a heavy line holding down a live bait that can't swim properly. This gives a more natural presented bait, and if you can fish this light, then by all means do it. Then we go to the heavier end of the spectrum, and we've got these 200 pound 3 foot with catfish hooks on a big clip at the top, crimped in place. Now these, I would use these at night, and I would thread these on to a large mackerel, and these can be used for bluefish, and a bluefish will not go through this. You might even be lucky enough if a shark takes it, you might, if you hook it in the corner of their mouth, land it. But obviously if you want to go shark, try for shark, you want to have a wire trace. So all you need to do, once you've built your float rig, is to then just tie some different hook lengths. I wouldn't use a circle hook if you're dead baiting. They don't present very well on a dead bait. I would try and use a larger hook like this with a little bit of a longer shank and a bit of a wider gate there. So you could, if you can, thread this through the fish itself. If you can get a disgorger or something like that, poke it through the mouth of the fish, through its guts and out through its tail, and follow that through. You can then sit your bait head first in line on your rig. This will then float underneath that, and hopefully something will take it. So, hope this has all helped. Here's your float rig here, like so, very simple. And then you can have a nice selection of hook lengths to clip underneath it, depending on what bait you're going to use. Until next time, tight lines.